Beneath a sky the color of old steel, the main gate loomed ahead like a relic from a world that never wanted to be remembered. Its iron bars were twisted in places, scarred with deep grooves that looked less like rust and more like something clawed at them from the inside. A cold wind hissed through the gaps, carrying with it a smell, metallic, damp, and faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in the dark. The path leading to it was choked with weeds, but in the silence, I swore, I could hear something beyond the gate. Not movement, not voices, just a presence, pressing outward as if the air itself remembered what it had once kept in. I took a cautious step forward, the crunch of gravel under my boots far too loud in the heavy quiet. The main gate's shadow stretched toward me, thin and warped by the dim light filtering through the cloud-choked sky. My breath fogged in the cold, and with every inhale, that strange metallic scent grew sharper, as if the air was steeped in it. I told myself it was just rust, the lingering decay of forgotten steel, but the smell carried an undertone I couldn't name. Something human, something wrong. I ran my gloved fingers along one of the bent iron bars. The metal felt unnaturally cold, colder than the air, almost as if it had been holding on to a winter that never ended. My flashlight beam caught on a set of faint markings just below eye level. At first glance they looked like scratches from an animal, but when I leaned closer I saw they were deliberate symbols, carved deep into the iron. Their shapes were jagged, asymmetrical, and yet there was a strange rhythm to them, like a language written in a hurry. I tried to make out more of the pattern, but the grooves were filled with some kind of black residue, flaking away like burned wood when I touched it. I stepped back, uneasy, scanning the rest of the gate. The symbols were everywhere, some high, some low, as if whoever carved them had been desperate to leave a message no matter where they stood. On the other side of the bars, the overgrown path curved into shadow. My flashlight revealed fragments of broken stone pillars lining the way, each one leaning at a different angle. Beyond that, only darkness. I called out, not loud, just enough to hear my own voice. The sound died almost instantly, smothered before it could echo. That was the first time I noticed the air beyond the gate seemed thicker somehow. The mist didn't swirl or drift. It hung, as if the space inside was sealed from the wind entirely. I glanced up to where the bars met the gate's arch, and there I saw it, a lock so large it could have held a prison door. Its surface was pitted and scarred, but the clasp was still intact, wrapped in a length of chain that looked far too new for a place so abandoned. I crouched to examine it, the beam of my flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. The chain links gleamed faintly, untouched by rust, each one perfectly smooth. The padlock bore no manufacturer's name, no keyhole, only another set of those strange carved symbols. I traced one with my finger and felt a sudden prickle under my skin, like static or the first bite of frost. A gust of wind rattled the weeds behind me, snapping me out of the moment. I turned quickly, scanning the tree line, but there was nothing, only the skeletal branches swaying. Still, it didn't feel like I was alone. It was that subtle, gnawing sense that someone was watching, not from the distance, but from just beyond the threshold of the gate. I stepped back, trying to take in the full structure from a distance. The frame was set into a crumbling stone wall that extended to either side until it vanished into the woods. Parts of the wall had collapsed entirely, leaving jagged gaps just wide enough to slip through. Yet something about the gate told me it was the only proper way in. Those gaps in the wall might as well have been painted on a backdrop. They didn't feel real. My light drifted to the ground near the gate, where the weeds thinned out into bare earth. There, half buried in the soil, I saw what looked like a shard of broken glass. I reached down and pulled it free, realizing it was the corner of an old photograph. The image was faded, water-damaged, but I could still make out the face of a young man. His expression was caught mid-smile, yet there was something in his eyes, not joy, not fear, but a kind of resignation. The edges of the photo were darkened, as if burned. On the back in smudged ink were 3 words: "Don't go inside." The air around me seemed to tighten, my pulse quickened, but I forced myself to slip the photograph into my pocket. I told myself I was here to observe, to document, but that quiet warning printed in shaky handwriting lingered in my thoughts like a whisper. I circled the gate slowly, my boots crunching over patches of broken stone. On the far side, near the base of the wall, I noticed an irregular mound beneath the weeds. Brushing away the dried stems revealed another padlock, identical to the one on the front. Same smooth metal, same symbols, same cold. It was locked to a heavy iron loop anchored deep into the wall. A chain snaked out from it, disappearing into the earth as if something beneath the ground was being restrained. I crouched lower, pressing my ear to the mound. For a moment there was nothing. Then, faintly, I heard it, not movement exactly, but a sound like air rushing through a narrow gap. It was steady, deliberate, almost breathing. I jerked back, stumbling into the weeds. My flashlight beam danced across the ground, catching on shards of something white, bones scattered in the dirt, some small enough to belong to animals, others far too large. I straightened quickly, scanning the area again, but the stillness had returned. The breathing, if that's what it had been, was gone. My hands were colder now, and not just from the weather. The gate loomed larger than before, its bars like ribs holding back something unseen. I walked back to the front, my breath coming quicker. The chain across the gate seemed tighter now, the links pulled taut as if strained from the other side. I reached out, intending to test the metal's strength, but the moment my glove brushed it, the padlock clicked once softly, like a sigh. It didn't open, but the sound made my chest tighten. Something inside the gate shifted. It was subtle, just a faint distortion in the mist, as though a figure had moved through it. My beam caught nothing solid, but the impression remained lingering in the corner of my eye, no matter where I looked. I stepped back again, fighting the urge to turn and leave. The photograph in my pocket felt heavier now, as if it had absorbed some of the error from the other side. I told myself I'd take one last look, document the symbols, and then leave for the night. But as I raised my flashlight to the arch again, I saw a new mark that hadn't been there before. The dust around it was fresh, the edges sharp. It was a single vertical line, deep and deliberate, carved into the iron in the exact place my hand had touched the chain. I froze. The line wasn't random, it matched the first stroke of a symbol I'd seen repeated over and over on the gate, but here, it was alone, unfinished, as if something or someone had just started writing. The mist beyond the bars stirred again. This time, I didn't imagine it. A faint outline took shape, tall, still, standing exactly in the center of the path. It didn't move closer, but it didn't fade either. The air between us was dense, the silence pressing in until I could hear nothing but the dull, heavy thud of my own heartbeat. And then, from somewhere deep beyond the gate, a sound cut through the stillness, the sharp, metallic scrape of another lock turning, you said. Right, second part. The old iron hinges groaned as I pushed the gate just wide enough to slip through the air inside, somehow colder than the night I'd left behind. My flashlight beam sliced through the dark, catching dust swirling lazily in the stagnant air. The ground was uneven, a mixture of cracked concrete and patches of dirt where weeds had claimed what was once carefully laid stone. Every step echoed too loud, as if the walls themselves were listening. To my left, a row of skeletal trees leaned inward, their bare branches knitting together like twisted fingers blocking out the sky. Somewhere deeper in, a metallic clang rang out, sharp, deliberate. I froze. The sound didn't belong to the wind or the slow decay of time. It was the kind of sound made when something wants you to know it's there. I followed the noise, moving cautiously, the beam of my flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. As I neared what looked like the remnants of an old security post, I noticed a faint glow pulsing from inside. Not electric, too warm for that, more like candlelight, but unsteady, almost breathing. I edged closer, careful not to crunch the gravel underfoot, until I could peer inside through a jagged hole in the wall. Inside, the small room was stripped bare except for a single metal chair in the center. On it sat a tarnished brass lantern, its flames sputtering weakly. The oddest thing was the paper tacked to the wall above it, yellowed, edges curled, but the ink was still sharp. It was a map, hand-drawn, of the compound. But unlike any map I'd seen before, this one had areas marked in heavy black, with arrows pointing to nowhere. There were no labels, no keys, just thick, angry strokes that seemed almost emotional. Before I could step inside, the flame in the lantern blinked out, as if someone had pinched it between their fingers. My flashlight caught the shine of something on the floor, near the chair. A key. It was large, iron, and far too ornate to belong to anything modern. I bent to pick it up, and as my fingers closed around the cold metal, I felt, not imagined, the faintest vibration, like a hum. From somewhere deeper in the compound came a low, dragging sound. Slow, deliberate, like something heavy being pulled across the ground. I slipped the key into my pocket and backed away from the post, my instinct screaming to retreat. But there was a strange pull, a curiosity that overrode caution. The dragging continued, pausing occasionally, and each time it stopped, I could hear something else, breathing, long, strained breaths, as if through a narrow passage. I moved toward the sound, past piles of crumbling bricks and a half-collapsed archway. The deeper I went, the thicker the air became, heavy with the scent of rust and something else, something organic, almost sweet but rotting at the edges. My light swept across a toppled sign, its paint flaking, the letters barely legible. No entry beyond this point. Ignoring the warning, I stepped over the barrier and into a narrow corridor flanked by chain-link fencing. Behind the fence, shapes loomed in the darkness, tall, human-sized, unmoving. I slowed my steps, focusing the beam on one of them. It was a mannequin, not the kind from a clothing store, but more lifelike, its skin painted with uncanny detail, the glassy eyes catching the light in a way that made them seem almost wet. There were dozens, lined up along both sides, each in a different posture. One sat in a chair, head tilted as if listening. Another stood with one arm outstretched, fingers curled just shy of touching the fence. And then my light hit one at the far end that didn't look quite right. The paint on its face was cracked, but behind those cracks, something moved. I took a slow step forward, heart pounding. The mannequin blinked once, then it tilted its head in the same deliberate way the others had been posed. My breath caught in my throat. The chain link between us was twisted in one spot, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through if they were desperate. The dragging sound resumed, this time from somewhere behind me. I spun around, light swinging wildly, but saw nothing. When I turned back, the blinking mannequin was gone, just an empty space between the others, the faintest scrape on the floor where its feet had been. I quickened my pace, moving toward. It looked like the end of the corridor. My mind was racing, every instinct telling me to leave, but the key in my pocket felt heavier now, almost hot against my thigh. I emerged into an open courtyard surrounded by tall, windowless walls. In the center was a circular stone structure, waist-high with a rusted metal lid. Well, the dragging stopped again, replaced by a faint tapping from below. I approached slowly, the sound becoming more rhythmic, more intentional, like someone knocking in code. My hand hovered over the lid, and I realized it wasn't locked. Just heavy. I gripped it and lifted with all my strength. It resisted at first, then gave way with a shriek of metal against stone. The smell hit me first, damp, earthy, and old. My light cut into the blackness below, catching on something that gleamed wetly far down in the shaft. And then, rising slowly into view, was a hand. Not skeletal, not decomposed, but pale and alive, fingers curling and uncurling as if reaching for me. My breath froze. The knocking had stopped. Without thinking, I stumbled backward, the lid crashing shut as my grip failed. The sound echoed off the courtyard walls, followed by a silence so deep it pressed against my ears. And then, softly, from directly behind me, came a whisper, "You shouldn't have opened it." I turned, light trembling, but the courtyard was empty. No wind, no movement, just my own breathing, fast, uneven. I took a step toward the gate I'd come through, but a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye stopped me. Up along the top of the wall, a shadow shifted, its outline unmistakably human. It crouched, watching. Then, in a fluid motion, it dropped out of sight. I didn't chase it. Instead, I stood there, frozen, realizing the gate back wasn't where I thought it was. The walls seemed taller now, the angle sharper, and the path I'd taken was gone. In its place was a narrow archway I was certain hadn't been there before, carved with the same ornate patterns as the key in my pocket. The whisper came again, closer this time. "If you're going to leave, you'll need to trade." The beam from my flashlight stretched forward, trembling slightly in my grasp as I stepped beyond the gate's shadow. The path ahead wasn't a road in any modern sense more, a strip of cracked concrete, warped and broken by decades of neglect. Weeds had grown up through every fracture, their roots forcing the slabs apart like silent saboteurs. My boots crunched against loose gravel, every sound echoing far louder than it should have in the still night. The air here was heavier, as if the act of crossing that threshold had moved me into a different atmosphere altogether. A faint hum lingered at the edge of hearing, not mechanical, not exactly natural either, just enough to make my skin prickle. I glanced back over my shoulder, the outline of the gate barely visible now in the gloom. Beyond it, the outside world seemed to dissolve, like looking at reality through thick glass. I turned forward again. The first structure came into view just off the path, a guard post, its small concrete shell still intact but weathered and stained. The glass in the narrow observation windows had long since shattered, leaving jagged teeth in the frames. I moved closer, feeling that same invisible pressure in the air deepen. Inside, there was a chair, metal rusted, the seat bent as though someone had stood on it. Papers littered the floor, but they were bleached to near white, their ink long faded away. Only faint impressions remained, the words erased by time, yet their presence undeniable. I reached out and ran a gloved finger along the wall, surprised to find faint indentations carved into the concrete, initials, dates, short phrases and languages I didn't recognize. It felt less like graffiti and more like someone's desperate attempt to leave proof they'd been here. The back corner of the room was darker, the flashlight beam seeming to thin in the air before reaching it. My stomach tightened. Something metallic glinted from within the shadows. I stepped closer and crouched, revealing a padlock still sealed, attached to a small access hatch low to the ground. It was strange. The rest of the place looked abandoned for decades, yet the padlock was clean, uncorroded, the kind of steel that still reflected light like it was new. I tugged at it out of habit, but the lock didn't budge, not even a rattle. I stood there for a moment longer, the hum in the air growing just slightly louder, and decided to leave it for now. Back outside, I continued down the cracked path. The overgrowth thickened on either side, forming walls of black-green foliage. At one point I thought I saw the silhouette of an old watchtower rising above the tree line, but when I stopped and focused, it was gone. My mind told me I'd seen nothing more than the twist of branches in the dark. My gut wasn't so sure. The second building appeared without warning, emerging from the shadows like it had been waiting. This one was larger, squat two-story structure with no sign of windows on the first floor. Its entrance was set back into a narrow alcove, the door slightly ajar. I could smell the interior before I stepped inside. damp stone, rust, and something faintly acidic, like old batteries. I pushed the door gently, wincing at the groan of its hinges. The sound seemed to ripple outward, vanishing into silence too quickly. My flashlight cut across long, empty corridors, the paint on the walls curling downward like shed skin. The floor was littered with fragments of plaster and glass, crunching under every step near the far wall. My light caught something unusual, a strip of metal embedded in the floor, running parallel to the wall for about 2 meters before disappearing into the concrete. It looked almost like part of a track, the kind used for sliding heavy panels. I crouched to inspect it and found traces of oil, not new, but far too fresh for a place like this. Someone had been here recently. That realization brought a pulse of awareness into my chest. I scanned the rest of the room, every corner, every darkened doorway. Nothing moved. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that my presence was being measured, recorded, maybe even anticipated. In one corner, half buried under debris, was a box, wooden, about the size of a crate used for munitions. I knelt and cleared the rubble away, coughing against the dust that billowed up. The box was heavy, heavier than I expected, and when I shifted it slightly, I heard a soft clink from within. But the lid was nailed shut, not just nailed, but reinforced with a crossbar of metal plates. Again, the workmanship was oddly pristine. It didn't belong to the decay around it. As I ran my fingers along the metal, I noticed something carved into the wood beneath. Numbers, 3 rows of them, uneven and shallow as if scratched in haste. I jotted them into my notebook without thinking, my hand moving fast, almost reflexively. Then, from somewhere deep in the building, there came a sound. It wasn't the hum this time, it was sharper. A sudden metallic snap, followed by a faint, dragging noise. I froze, every muscle tensed, the flashlight beam locked on the dark hallway from which the sound had come. The dragging stopped. Silence reclaimed the space. I should have turned back right then, returned to the gate, left whatever this place was to its own history. But something had already taken hold of me, the same pool that had brought me here in the first place, the same pool that whispered there was more ahead. I backed away from the crate, my eyes never leaving that hallway, and stepped slowly toward the door. My boot caught on something small and I glanced down. A single key, dull with age, lying, half buried in the dust. I picked it up without hesitation, slipping it into my pocket. Outside again, the air felt no lighter. The hum was back, constant now, almost like it had adjusted to my presence. I pressed on, the path narrowing further, until it was barely wide enough for one person. The trees overhead closed in, their branches tangling into shapes that seemed almost purposeful. Through a gap in the foliage ahead, I caught my first glimpse of something massive, a structure larger than any I'd seen yet. Its silhouette jagged against the sky, it rose from the darkness like the spine of some ancient creature, waiting, watching. My pace slowed, my heart beat loud in my ears. Whatever this was, it wasn't just another building. I was about to step forward when the sound returned, not from behind me this time, but from somewhere inside that looming structure. A slow, deliberate knock, 3 times. And then, as if in response to my frozen hesitation, the front of the structure shifted slightly. A door I hadn't noticed before creaked open by no more than an inch, just enough for darkness to spill out. Inside, the mechanical room felt alive. Thick, corroded pipes snaked along the walls and ceiling, many of them dripping condensation that splattered onto the dusty floor. The orange light I'd seen outside came from a single still-functioning bulb hanging in the center of the room. It swayed gently as if stirred by an unseen hand, casting long, restless shadows across the machinery. The low mechanical hum was louder here, a deep vibration that I could feel in my ribcage. It was coming from somewhere below. I stepped forward, weaving through the metal labyrinth until I found a grated floor panel at the far end. Beneath it I could just make out a dim tunnel, illuminated by a flickering light. The air rising from it was warmer, and carried a faint metallic scent like heated steel. I knelt, running my fingers over the bolts, securing the grate. They looked ancient, but when I twisted one, it gave way almost too easily, as if someone had loosened it recently. My heart quickened. This wasn't just an abandoned asylum. Someone had been here, maybe was still here. The last bolt came free with a soft clink, and I slid the grate aside. The opening gaped like a black mouth. I hesitated only a moment before climbing down the narrow ladder, my flashlight beam cutting through the stale air dot at the bottom. The tunnel stretched in both directions, but the hum was stronger to my left. I followed it, my boots crunching on loose gravel. The walls here were different, smooth concrete, with strange, stenciled numbers repeating every few feet. C7, C8, C-9. Finally, I reached the source of the hum. A heavy steel door loomed ahead, sealed with an industrial lockbox. This one was different from the others. There was no rust, no dust. The metal gleamed faintly, as though polished on. My pulse hammered in my ears. I reached for the lock, but before I could touch it, a sound froze me in place. 3 slow knocks from the other side. They weren't loud, but in the suffocating silence they felt like cannon blasts. My breath caught. Instinct screamed at me to run, yet my feet stayed planted. Then, a voice, it was low, distorted, as though filtered through layers of static, but the words were unmistakable. "You shouldn't have come here." The light above me flickered violently, and the hum deepened until it felt like the walls themselves were vibrating. I stumbled back, my flashlight jerking toward the corridor behind me. When I turned back, the steel door was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of blackness visible between it and the frame. Something inside shifted. Just beyond the narrow gap, a hand pale and possibly long-fingered slid into view and gripped the edge of the door. Its nails scraped metal with a slow, deliberate sound, like someone sharpening a blade. That was enough. I turned and bolted, boots pounding the tunnel floor. The hum seemed to follow me, growing louder, closer, until I was convinced whatever was behind that door was only steps away. I reached the ladder and scrambled up, my hand slipping on the cold rungs. As I hauled myself out, the orange light above the machinery blinked out entirely, plunging the room into darkness. I didn't stop to replace the grate. I ran back through the hallway, past Ward C, past the second gate, until the outline of the main entrance appeared ahead. My lungs burned. My legs screamed, but I didn't slow until I burst into the open air. The night outside was calm, still, too still. I turned to look at the building one last time. The gate I had forced open was shut again, locked, and through the bars. In the dim moonlight, I saw it, the same tall figure from the photograph, standing perfectly still, watching me. The hum was gone. But, in its place, a faint echo of the voice drifted through the air, carried on the night breeze. "You'll be back." I didn't answer. I didn't look away until I reached my car, started the engine, and drove without stopping until the asylum was miles behind me. But even then, the feeling didn't fade. The vibration still thrummed faintly in my chest, like a mechanical heartbeat. That wasn't mine. If you felt the chill of this journey and want to uncover what really lurks beyond the gate, don't just leave now. Hit that subscribe button, tap like, and share this with someone who loves a good mystery. The deeper we go, the darker it gets, and you won't want to miss what comes next.